to the information-laden building blocks known as the DNA code.
DNA is a self-replicating molecule which sometimes replicates incorrectly. Often these incorrect pairings of DNA building blocks are benign. Sometimes they are harmful, and the resulting organism falls ill and dies. Yet sometimes, as chance would have it, the new coding has a beneficial effect on the host, and this makes that host better adapted for the environment. So much better adapted, in fact, that these beneficial mistakes are passed on to successive generations. Gradually, over billions of years, these beneficial mistakes build up
to perhaps the crowning design achievement, the incredible and delicate complexity of the human brain-mind relationship.
The word mind here is problematic. It's a word without specific meaning. Consequently, exactly what is meant here by the term mind-brain relationship is difficult to pinpoint. What I can tell you is that the human brain is a perfect metaphor of gradual evolution. All of the parts evolved and built on the functions of preceding, less developed or less evolved parts. By comparing the human brain to our ancestors down the evolutionary chain, we can see these changes occurring. There are three primary layers to the human brain: the central core, the limbic system, and the cerebral hemispheres. The first of these to develop was the central core, so it is the most primitive. Found even in the most undeveloped vertebrates, the central core sits at the base of the skull in humans, and here exits the skull to join the brain with the rest of the nervous system at the spinal cord. The base portion of the central core is known as the hindbrain. The lower part of the hindbrain is known as the medulla, and the upper portion is known as the pons. The medulla, being primitive and less evolved, controls such basic bodily functions as heart rate and breathing, while the slightly more evolved pons region regulates sleep. The remaining portions of the central core are the cerebellum, the midbrain, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the reticular formation. The cerebellum, which means little brain, controls balance and fluidity of motion. The midbrain, a widened section of the brainstem, controls the senses of hearing and sight. The thalamus is composed of two egg-shaped structures which relay sensory information. Below this is the hypothalamus, which governs instinctual responses such as hunger and rage. Finally, part of the central core is a neural net, which connects to all of the other mentioned parts and sends alerts to the higher brain layers. The next layer, the limbic system, seems to be a more recent evolutionary development. The function of the limbic system is supposed to be one of suppressing instinct so that decision-making can occur. It also seems to be the primary housing for memories, which are essential for learning and therefore learned response. The two primary subsets of the system are the hippocampus and the amygdala, and these also seem to dictate self-preservation responses such as fear, panic, and aggression. The final layer, the cerebral cortex, is composed entirely of unmyelinated neurons known as gray matter and comprises 4/5 of the total mass of the brain. It is divided into two sections known as hemispheres and is responsible for processing most conscious brain activity such as memory, thought, language, vision, and emotions. And while all of these processes work together seamlessly and fluidly most of the time, it is not the most efficient possible model. Why? Because each distinct function developed one at a time over billions of years of evolution. A designer or engineer might make modifications to a design over time, but it is a bad designer who builds the new device on the remnants of the old one.
The amazing complexity evident in the universe matches well with what the Bible says about God's intelligent creative actions. The book of Proverbs states, "By wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding he set the heavens in place."
The Bhagavad Gita states, "Action is the product of the qualities inherent in nature." The Rig Veda states, "Whence this creation has arisen, perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it, in the highest heaven, only he knows, or perhaps he does not." The Quran states, "And the sun runneth on into a resting place for him. That is the measuring of the mighty, the wise. And the moon we have appointed mansions till she return like an old shriveled palm leaf. It is not for the sun to overtake the moon, nor doth the night outstrip the day. They float each in an orbit." So what?
Yet if you reject the logical inference that God stands behind the universe as an explanatory hypothesis, then you must conclude that all the order, complexity, and intelligibility contained in the universe ultimately results from chance and coincidence.
Here, the creators of this video are guilty of the fallacy of conflating random chance with natural selection. But probability does not apply when discussing natural selection because the end result was not forecast beforehand. When you are playing craps, you are trying first to throw a 7 and to avoid throwing snake eyes, boxcars, or 3. The odds are slightly in your favor because the probability of throwing a 7 is slightly better than the probability of throwing any of the other combinations. But nature did not set out to design the human brain, and if we were to begin again on a different planet with all of the same characteristics as the primal Earth, we would not expect human life to ever evolve again. In fact, one would be a fool to take that bet, even if one had the 14 billion years necessary to see the bet play out.
But how can such rational enterprises as logic, mathematics, and science be reasonably justified when the human brain and mind are the results of a non-rational mindless accident?
Logic, mathematics, and science are not created out of whole cloth in the minds of men. Logic, mathematics, and science are built on imperial absolutes. 1 plus 1 equals 2 because it does, not because the human mind willed it so.
Number 3. God uniquely accounts for the reality of objective ethical values.
Here we see they use the word objective to describe the moral values of the Christian God in the Bible. The problem here is that the values described in the Bible are either not objective or they are not unique to the Christian God.
Moral values are fundamental parts of human life, every bit as real as the law of gravity, and people are generally intuitively cognizant of their moral obligations.
People who have never heard of God also exhibit a cognizance of so-called objective moral obligation. So how is this possible if objective moral behavior is the result of faith in God?
In the human heart, people readily experience the pool of real moral duty and obligation. This sense of moral oughtness is indeed prescriptive in nature and transcends mere subjective feelings and individual considerations.
Elephant herds exhibit moral behavior. Lion prides and ant colonies do as well.
Basic moral intuitions such as it is wrong to murder, or it is right to be loving, truthful, courageous, and compassionate, testify to the truth of objective moral values. These values appear to stand as distinct from and independent of the human mind and will. In other words, they're discovered, not invented. But what accounts for the existence of objective, universal, unchanging moral principles? What guarantees their validity? And what is their source and foundation? The ethics of Christian theism are grounded in the morally perfect nature of God, who has specifically revealed his will to mankind. God therefore stands as the source and foundation for objective moral values.
Many of the moral declarations found in the Bible are vague by non-biblical standards. For example, thou shalt not kill is an objective value of God's until we find ourselves confronted by outgroups such as the Canaanites, and Abraham was rewarded for his willingness to make a blood sacrifice of his own son.
Absolute moral law extends from the cosmic moral lawgiver. The God revealed in the Judeo-Christian scriptures is the morally perfect person who stands behind the objective moral order discovered in the universe.
Who says they have objective validity? Is it wrong to kill for one's country? For food? To save another? Some might argue killing wrong under one circumstance and right under another.
Yet if you reject belief in God, how can objective morality be explained?
So then we face Euthyphro's dilemma. Are those things which God declares right subject to his fiat to be right, or are they right despite his fiat? If the prior, then they are subjective. If the latter, then his fiat is unnecessary.
Why was it wrong for the Nazis to murder the Jews if human beings are merely highly evolved animals? As Dostoevsky proclaimed, if God doesn't exist, everything is permissible.
Why was it right for the Israelites to murder the people of Canaan if human beings are not willing to subjectively apply all so-called moral absolutes? As Voltaire proclaimed, if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him.
Number 4. God uniquely accounts for the enigma of man.
Prepare for a circular argument.
Human nature poses a puzzling paradox. While capable of great things in the area of mathematics, science, technology, philosophy, the arts, humanitarian and charitable acts, and so forth, humanity is also equally capable of shameful and evil acts, rape, robbery, racism, slavery, and mass murder. Explaining human nature poses an extraordinary philosophical, psychological, and spiritual challenge.
It poses a philosophical challenge only in that philosophy recognizes this nature and is then presented with the challenge of determining whether this represents a true duality or whether it can be pragmatically explained. The only psychological challenge it poses is that of the limitations of our understanding of the evolved brain. And the real spiritual challenge is to find a way to compel a spiritual necessity into the issue.